In my recent video on Crazy Rich Asians, we looked at how that novel uses the concept of genre to hook readers. I wanted to explore that topic further, so I reached out to the editor of Crazy Rich Asians, Jenny Jackson. She's vice president and executive editor at Alfred A. Knopf. And in addition to her 20 years of experience in the industry, she's also going to be a debut novelist soon, so she has this unique perspective from both sides of the publication process. She'll share some valuable insights that are relevant for all of us who are trying to get our writing out there. But I started our conversation by asking her where her love of fiction actually began and how that led her to a career in publishing.
I've always just read an insane number of books, even in my free time. And if we were going away on a family vacation for 10 days, I would pack 10 novels in my suitcase. And, my brother does the same thing. My mom does the same thing. My dad does too. And one of the things that my husband was so confused by when he first started spending time with my family is that in my house growing up, at breakfast and at lunch, it is perfectly acceptable to sit down at the table with a book and not talk to anyone and just read the entire time that you're having your meal. He sat down at lunch and was like, aren't we going to talk to each other? Shh, no.
This is family time.
Exactly. We're all going to go into our books. And so it's always been an obsession of mine. And after college, I was an English major and I did a lot of creative writing in college, but I didn't think I was ready to pursue writing full time. I'm pretty social. I enjoy working in groups. I enjoy talking to people, and also I kind of enjoy working on a lot of things at once. And so I went to the publishing course at Columbia University, and I didn't know anybody in publishing. I had one friend in New York, so I moved here with $2,000 and really was like, hope I get a job. And I was hired as an editorial assistant at Vintage, so the paperback arm of the Knopf Doubleday Group. And I spent 10 years in paperbacks working on paperback reprints and then starting to acquire my own titles. And then 10 years ago, I moved from paperback to hardcover and work exclusively now on hardcover. All fiction, almost all fiction. And the books, it's amazing. I get to pick out the books I want to work on. And so my list represents what I love. It kind of runs the gamut from very literary to super smart commercial fiction.
So getting these manuscripts and kind of reading and selecting and having your interest piqued by a particular story, I wonder if you could think back to, it's been a couple of years now since you got Crazy Rich Asians, but getting the manuscript on your desk, whether physically or in your inbox, opening it up and going into the story for the first time, what was your reaction? What was your feeling? And when did you know this is something that I am really passionate about and I want to see brought to the world?
When I first read this book, I had no way of knowing that it was going to end up being as huge a success as it has been, that it would go on to be, a blockbuster film, that it would be as big a bestseller as it is. But I did know right away that there was something that just sparkled on the page. It's interesting because while Crazy Rich Asians does fit into a genre, it's a rom-com, there is something so fresh about it. We hadn't read this story before. And so that to me is kind of gold, when it's a book that pulls you in and that engrosses you and that you feel immediately intrigued by the world of, but that also feels like it's taking the genre in a step forward, that it's challenging the status quo, and it's just better than what you've read before.
That actually brings me to a couple of things that I talked about in the video. I'm just going over my notes here. I talked about some of those different elements, how, as you're saying, it falls within a genre, but it also kind of subverts that and pushes it a little bit further. And I ended the video by asking the viewer, after I've listed all these things, what do you think the genre of Crazy Rich Asians is? And I want to throw that question over to you, Jenny. You said it's a rom-com, but what sort of defines that in your mind as being in that genre?
There are a couple things that Kevin does really well in Crazy Rich Asians. One is that he has given us Rachel as a protagonist, because Kevin's real goal with Crazy Rich Asians is to introduce the global reader to the high net worth individuals of Singapore. I've never been to Singapore. I don't actually know any billionaires. And yet he brings us into this world. And so the best way to bring a reader into an unfamiliar world is to offer them a character much like themselves, an outsider. And the reader can experience the journey with Rachel. She's an every woman. She's a middle-class American girl who was plunged into this world of splendor. And so that was an incredibly smart thing for Kevin to do. I mean, we talk about how there are only X many number of stories, and one of them is a stranger comes to town. That's Rachel. She's the stranger who comes to town. And so Rachel is really the key to unlocking the world of Crazy Rich Asians. The other thing that Kevin has done that is so smart is that while Rachel and Nick are the heart of the book, he lets them be the most relatable characters, and then he populates the book with a huge cast of secondary characters who are extreme, who are extravagant, who are absurd, who are a lot more extra than Rachel and Nick. You know, Eddie, who is a complete wild man, or Astrid, or Araminta, or Picklin. That these characters are able to be totally wild because we're rooted in Rachel and Nick, who are the more kind of relatable center in the book. And he does a great job of accessing the more outrageous pieces of culture in Singapore through his secondary characters, while keeping the reader engaged through the main characters.
There was this promotional piece that I think you wrote about Crazy Rich Asians for a reading group, and it was highlighting a lot of the kind of the luxury side of the novel, like, oh, you're going to see all these amazing handbags and these yachts, and you're going to fly around the world with these jet set elite. And so I don't know a lot of billionaires, so that particularly doesn't necessarily hook me, but the character story is what gets me. And then for another reader, it might be this is just a group of Asian and Asian American characters who are unapologetically who they are. They're just going about this amazing story, and that's attractive too to a different reader. And maybe ideally all those things kind of line up in your sort of ideal reader persona. But maybe could you talk about how some of those different aspects of the book, can reach different audiences, or are they really something that you identify and say, okay, we're going to go after this genre and this demographic, and with a different readership, we're going to talk about the book in a different way? Or are you just saying this is the book and we're trying to hit kind of a broad audience?
Kevin was very thoughtful in what he wanted to do with Crazy Rich Asians, because, there are countless phenomenal Asian writers and Asian American writers. I don't think that we had read about these specific Asians before as American readers. There aren't a lot of books like Crazy Rich Asians about this milieu. And so Kevin was doing something new that was celebrated, definitely. There were also readers who said, why do you have to write about rich people to make people want to read about Asians? And Kevin sort of said, you don't. This is my story. It's not everyone's story. Tell your story. But Kevin did a really great job of writing something new that people needed to hear and to experience. But it was important for us to really reach out to Asian communities early on with the material and build that excitement. And it was very organic. And that community, it starts on Goodreads, it starts among bloggers, it starts among reviewers. And then, the other piece that we explored with this was that sort of luxury piece in publishing this. We placed first serial with Vogue, and it's unusual for Vogue to publish a piece of fiction, but they absolutely loved the book. they loved all the fashion in it. They wanted to take a stand on it. And so they did an excerpt and ran an excerpt of the book in Vogue before the book came out. And that really hooked in all the fashionistas at a huge swath of readers that came to the book for the fashion. So there are a lot of different ways in on this novel, and so we did make a point to go out and reach those different readerships through, different placements before the book came out.
Right. So genre, okay, we use this word. Maybe is it possible for you to kind of define that and how it really works in the minds of editors and publishers, from just at the sentence level, paragraph level, all the way to some of those marketing decisions in how you work on a book, how you acquire it, how you talk about it?
One of the things that people often assume about genre is that genre is the opposite of literary. And I think that that's a common assumption, but I don't think that it has to be true at all. I think one of the things that readers have really embraced over the past decade, if not before, is a hybrid, a literary take on a genre. I published Emily St. John Mandel's Station 11, and that's an example of a hybrid between genre, so science fiction, and literature. I think Kevin's book is a great example of hybrid between romantic comedy and literature. But when you think about genre, so thriller, science fiction, romance, they are defined by certain parameters. A thriller is probably going to have a murder in it. Science fiction is going to have something speculative in it. A romantic comedy is probably going to have a happy ending and center on a romantic relationship. I do think that it is easy to kind of market books where they have a specific genre. One of the things that you can do is there are basically all these different media outlets and marketing avenues that you can go in when you have a genre work. There are different conferences for thriller writers, for mystery writers, for romance writers. And so that's an easy way for us to tap into those audiences. One of the tricky things is when you have a book that sits between general readership and literature and genre, is making sure that you understand exactly where your book fits. Because if your book is not actually a mystery, but it has mysterious elements, and you pitch it hard to mystery readers are not going to have that. They're not going to like it. It's not going to be what they wanted. You're not going to get good reviews. So you have to be really mindful, and you can't try and shoehorn a book into a genre that it doesn't actually fulfill.
Yeah, I really love that point, because it's something that I certainly have struggled with or grown and learned in my own writing, is that I guess I would identify more as like a fantasy type writer, but then there's there's a full spectrum of what fantasy actually means. And then I would say I'm more on the literary end, if you want to call it. So then people say, well, you're a magical realist. I'm like, I guess, if you want to define it that way. But I think bringing it back to Crazy Rich Asians, one thing that was really smart about it is that it is very clear about the niche that it's filling, and it does that very early on. Like, exactly sort of what experience you're in for as a reader, and the kind of the nuance and the subtlety that it's able to play with. I wonder if you could talk about, from your point as an editor, your point of view as an editor, when you see a novelist bring in a story and maybe the genre isn't quite as clear as that one, how do you kind of nudge them in a way to get to that clarity? How important is it to have that clarity? What can writers do to accentuate that?
I'm totally going to disappoint you with my answer here, because I don't think that I do that. I don't think that I will ever really help my author make their book fit more into the genre. I think it's my job as the publisher to match what the finished product is with the right audience, because I think that the book deserves to be the best version of whatever it is, but I don't want to make it more of a mystery if that's not the heart of it. I don't want to make it more fantasy if that's not the heart of it. Instead, I just think that when it comes time to market that book, that's when we have to be really good at our jobs to make sure that we are explaining to readers exactly what the book is, so that we're not met with disappointment or misunderstanding in the marketplace. But I think that when you have a writer who, is trying something new, yeah, sometimes it doesn't work. One of the phrases that you hear editors say when they're evaluating a manuscript is they'll say, oh, it falls between two stools. And, it's a silly way of putting it, but it means it's not a mystery, it's not literature, I don't get what it is. And that's valid, right? As a publisher, that's you saying, this is what it is, but I don't get how to reach readers for it. And so you shouldn't take it on. You should let somebody else take it on. But I'll tell you that if something is really exceptional, even if it falls between two stools, we'll figure out a way to do it. Because there are a lot of weird books out there, right? That, defy expectations, that are really even hard to talk about. And yet they're so good that you have to publish them anyway. I mean, these are funny examples, but you think of Emma Donohue's Room. What was that? The mom and the son trapped in her. Was that a thriller? Was it sort of. Was it character driven? Yes. I mean, that book defied genre, but it was so good that it didn't matter. But for most books, you do kind of want to understand and be able to say what it is. But I don't think it's my job to make the book be one thing in particular.
So is that something that writers should be, self-conscious about, or just cognizant of as they're writing and thinking about, well, where is my book going to fit in the, on the bookshelf or in the bookstore? Or should they just kind of pursue their artistic vision and hope for the best in some sense?
Well, two things. I think that a writer should stick to their artistic vision and follow that. But I also think that there comes a point in writing where, maybe you've written a third of the book, maybe you've written half the book, where you should sit down and you should write what we call a sales handle. You should write 60 words that describe your book. Put it on a Post-it, tape it above your desk. And as you're writing, and make it really good. Make it the sales handle that you would want, splashed on the back of the book. Make it the thing you would want people to say in an elevator. Tape it above your desk, and as you keep writing, keep looking at it and make your book live up to your definition of it. Because I think that if you can have that kind of clarity about what you're trying to do as you're writing, you'll be a lot more likely to end up with a commercially viable project.
That sounds great. That's a really kind of tangible thing I think people can take away.
There's one other I think interesting takeaway that I actually took from Kevin Kwan, and that I think readers might enjoy hearing about, is maybe if you're going to put up one Post-it note that has your handle for the book. Kevin told me that he keeps a Post-it note above his desk and it just says the word joy on it. And so Kevin set his intention when he was writing. He wanted to bring a reader joy. And so that you can feel that in every page of Crazy Rich Asians, that when he writes, he wants to be joyful. I have another writer, Chris Bajalian, who wrote The Flight Attendant. And Chris likes dread. And so he wants to conjure a delicious sense of dread as he is writing these thrillers. And so I think having a Post-it note that states the intended feeling for your reader can also be a really useful tool to keep the tone of your book on track when you write.
Yeah, that's kind of something similar to that I've come up with myself, which is the term postcard image. Like if I had, just one defining iconic image of what my story is, what do I kind of keep going back to? What emotion comes out of that image? And whenever I sort of get lost in the story, I'm like, what does that postcard image in my mind actually look like? What does that mean for the text, for the chapter, for the character? So it's really, I guess, encouraging to hear that other writers who are further along kind of have a similar system. And it's something that people can use and should use in their process. That's great. You mentioned a number of novels and different types of genres that you've worked with, different authors. As I understand, you're also on your way to publishing your own novel. in the near future. So just before we dive into what that's about, I'd love to know maybe some of the tips or best practices or some things that you've learned along the way editing that you were able to leverage into your writing process that maybe other people could think about and use as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that I knew when I was setting down to write is that when you choose whether you're going to write in first person, third person, or God help you, second person, you need to really think about how you're going to be limiting yourself in terms of what you can know at any point as you're writing. A first person narrative is so tricky because you only know what your character knows. And unless you're doing something where you have kind of an unreliable narrator, or a really voicey narrator where the reader sees things that they don't. In general, you're kind of stuck from just that worldview. So I've definitely kept that in mind as I was deciding how I wanted to approach my own material. I foolishly thought that writing from multiple perspectives would be the easiest, because one piece of advice that J. Courtney Sullivan, who wrote Maine and Saints for All Occasions, she once said that she likes to write from multiple points of view because whenever she gets stuck with one character, she can just get going on someone else. It's true. When you write from multiple POV, you really don't get stuck so much because you can just keep going on to the next. My shattering discovery is that while it's easier to write from multiple POV, when you go back to edit, it is an incredible headache because, when I wrote my first draft, it all strung along well. When it came time to edit, my editors asked me to move some major plot points up in the book. And it was like taking apart a jigsaw puzzle and, swapping out pieces. And it was so much harder to edit because certain characters couldn't know things that had to happen at certain points. So, I don't know, maybe it's sort of like a measure twice and cut once kind of rule, right? It's like, it'll be easier to write if you go multiple POV. Editing's going to be tricky. First person can be a lot harder to write, but I haven't done it successfully yet, but I could see that editing, it seems like it would be easier.
I guess we're all intrigued to know what your story is now. What is the name of the novel? What is it about? And where are you in your process of finishing it?
The book is called Pineapple Street, and it's a story of 3 women in the same Brooklyn family. And it's really about Brooklyn, and it's about inherited wealth from a female perspective and the way in which families can and can't talk about money. I was inspired to write it because I was reading this interesting article in the New York Times about these, 25-year-old billionaires who are deeply uncomfortable with having inherited money from their families and are working to give away that wealth. And it's complicated. And family lawyers are saying, well, you're 25. What do you know about money? Let's not be so rash. And these kids are saying, income inequality is one of the greatest blights on our country. And I don't want to be part of the problem. I want to be part of the solution. So I read this and it really got me thinking about how, millennials are going to be the greatest inheritors in American history. It's called the Great Wealth Transfer. And yet I think that young millennials have seen a lot of societal ills caused by income inequality. That's why, AOC and Bernie and a lot of politicians have so much support among young people. So it kind of sparked an idea for me. What would happen if a young rich millennial wanted to give away her family money? How would her family feel about that? And so that kind of got me going down the path of writing this novel.
So where are you in the process? Is it close to publication? Is it still being worked on? Where are you?
I hope that I'm really close to done with edits. So I handed in my first full draft in April, and I've done a couple big rounds of edits since then. I did a major restructure where I moved a lot of the big plot points up earlier in the book. And then the second round of editorial feedback, I was told that one of the characters needed to have sort of more relationships outside of the family. So I built in some friends and some really fun scenes there. And so I'm hoping that I'm pretty close to done, but I know I'm going to have one more round of line edits. And then in theory, the book will be coming out in January of 2023.
Oh, amazing. Yeah, that's really actually quite close when
It
you think
feels
about
soon, yeah.
Yeah. Amazing. So, as our time is slowly winding down, I want to kind of get a little bit of a broader view and ask you, what is it that inspires you, maybe as a writer, as a reader, as a human, that you wanna contribute artistically in this great sort of conversation that we call literature?
Well, at the risk of sounding like I was, some kind of like precocious little twit, my mom tells this story, which I like certainly was, but my mom tells this story about how I was 4 or 5 and I came in crying and she said, "Jenny, what's wrong?" And I said, "I'll just never know what it's like to be someone else." And that's like an absurd thing for a child to say, but I will say that's it, right? We're all just stuck in our own heads, stuck with our own experiences. And art is the best way for us to actually create empathy and understand other people's experiences. And I know some people find, film gives them that real understanding. I know other people find visual arts. For me, that's what reading is. For me, reading is actually the very most immediate way to feel like I truly understand how somebody else's brain works. Sometimes you read a book that has a narrator who you just know you would never ever encounter in real life, and you get to have this whole entire experience that lives with you. I mean, I'm sure there are books you read as a kid that formed the way you think about things. So that's where my passion comes from as an editor, is really being able to build bridges between people and help us just understand each other and hopefully be better humans because of that.
Jenny Jackson is vice president and executive editor at Alfred A. Knopf. She spoke to me from New York City, and you can follow her on Twitter. Links are in the description. This was the first interview on the channel, but it's something I want to keep doing in the future alongside my other video content, so I hope you'll stick around for that, and in the meantime, like and subscribe and all that other great YouTube stuff. Oh, and if you want to support the growth of this channel, you can now do that on Ko-fi.